Today, I'm speaking to somebody who's managed to overcome porn addiction and has designed a program that helps people like maybe some of you who are fighting porn addiction. I'm welcoming J.K Emezi.
Zorina, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
My pleasure. J.K., what is porn addiction?
First of all, to just jump into it, I'm not a big fan of using the term addiction simply because the term addict carries a lot of meaning behind it. There's a lot of conditioning. When people think of the term addiction, they think of somebody who's struggling with substance or alcohol. They think of somebody who's on the street who doesn't have a family. And this is very important to preface this conversation, Zorina, because when people hear about porn addiction or sex addiction, and we call it addiction, subconsciously, it creates a little bit of conflict because immediately they start fighting it. I'm not an addict. I don't want to identify as an addict. I don't want to identify as an addict. So the term we prefer to use is compulsive sexual behavior, right? Now, on the surface, we do talk about porn addiction because people are like, oh, porn addiction, I want to hear about it. But now that they're in, and if you're a listener, it's a compulsive sexual behavior. And this is when you are viewing pornography to the point that it is negatively impacting other domains of your life. You are trying to stop it, but despite the negative impact on your life, you're unable to stop. So an example could be you find yourself viewing pornography and masturbating in order to medicate stress or a strong emotion or a lack of intimacy. And even when you have that satisfaction of orgasm, even when you're done, a few hours later or a day later, you go right back to it. Maybe you have access to a spouse. Maybe you do have somebody you could be intimate with, but pornography is always the priority. It's showing up, the urge for it is showing up at inconvenient times. You are choosing it over other healthy coping strategies. But the most important thing is you don't even want to do it. It brings up feelings of shame and guilt. So when you find yourself in that situation, if you're listening, it's very likely that you're struggling with a compulsive sexual behavior, or you can call it porn addiction if you want to.
Yeah. Okay. And in what respect can it actually affect other areas of your life? I mean, is it something that you're going through yourself internally? How does it exactly impact other areas of life?
Yeah, it affects every domain of your life. Let's talk about what we call the social aspect of your life. First of all, depending on your conditioning, for people who have a compulsive behavior with pornography, when there's something in your life that you cannot control, and it has to do with sex, just because of the many of the cultures we come from, what it does is that it brings up a lot of shame within you. You're like, I keep watching this. I don't feel good about it. And my conditioning tells me that this isn't something good I should be doing. You feel shameful. The second thing is you feel hopeless, and this affects your self-image. The hopelessness comes because you're trying to end this behavior. You tell yourself, I'm not going to do this next week. I'm not going to watch this type of pornography. Yet you still do it. And what that tells you is that the story you tell yourself is, I'm a person who is incapable of managing myself. I'm a person who's not able to discipline myself. And it doesn't matter how you portray yourself in life. I work with a lot of executives who, on the surface, at work, they're very charismatic, they're patting everybody on the back, but they are deeply insecure and they feel very small. Why? Because there's a secret part of their life that's out of control. For those of you who might not be too familiar with pornography, and you might be wondering, well, what's the big deal, right? It's just porn, it's entertainment, right? I just wanted to point out that the problem with pornography, high-speed internet pornography, is that the more you watch it, the more taboo material that you need. Because as human beings, we are not designed to handle this sort of hyper stimuli. So when you think about it, I tell people, if you are a human being living today that watches pornography, even for your entertainment, maybe a couple of times a month, right? Nothing wrong with that. But understand that you have seen more naked people having sex than every single one of your ancestors before you. In history, none of them have seen that many people having sex. The question you want to ask yourself is, was my brain designed to handle that amount of stimuli? And what's the impact that it's having on my brain? So it's not only affecting your self-image, it's also affecting your relationship. Why? Because pornography has no intimacy in it. When you are watching people having sex, that is not intimacy. That is not closeness to somebody. That is not getting to know somebody and building a relationship. That is literally watching two people having sex. That's all you're doing. You're focused on the performance. What does that make you? It makes you a spectator. You are conditioning yourself to become a spectator when it comes to entertainment. I mean, I could keep going, Zorina, on different
Different layers.
different
Yeah,
domains.
yeah.
You're gonna have to stop me at each point. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that a lot of your clients actually feel guilty about it. What if people are not conditioned for whatever reason, be it social, be it the environment they come from? They're not conditioned to feel guilty. How do they recognize that they have an addiction?
The guilt part is something that eventually comes up for every addict. It doesn't matter who they are. Let's say somebody deals with an addiction to alcohol or an addiction to a substance. They are not exempt from feeling guilty. Just because they continuously engage in it doesn't mean they don't feel guilty. They're just an addict. They're addicted to it. So they're going to continue to engage in the behavior. Even the people who tell you, like we work with clients who show up and they say, I'll give you a good example. The wife of somebody shows up and says, my husband has this problem with pornography. I know he does because he prefers to watch pornography instead of being intimate with me. And he's always doing it. And I notice the more he watches pornography, the more he's checking out women. It's very disrespectful to our relationship and so on. And she brings the husband in. And he only comes in because he's like, well, you know, she said that if I don't come in, she's going to leave and take the kids, right? On the surface, he's like, dude, I just like watching pornography. I don't see the big deal. I don't see any of that. We categorize that person as a low remorse individual. What does that mean? It means that when he engages in this behavior, he does feel a negative emotion. But what he does is he's either suppressing it or he is stuck in the cycle because in order to stop feeling the shame, when the shame comes up, he feels uncomfortable. So he watches more pornography in order to get rid of the shame. Mm-hmm. So it's one of a few different situations, but it doesn't mean that the shame is not there. However, I do want to make it clear. Yeah. There are lots of people who view pornography on a regular basis who are not addicted to it, who do not feel any negative emotions or shame culturally. I want to acknowledge that. Just because you view pornography, just because you enjoy different sexual experiences or you like having a lot of sex, does not make you a porn addict. It is only when it reaches it meets the criteria that I described a few minutes ago of a compulsive behavior that it is a problem.
I see. Okay. So let's talk about the way the brain functions, because I understand that you've done a lot of research on that while you were developing your program. So how does the brain function differently in people who have the compulsion?
This is a great question. The first part of your brain that's impacted by pornography addiction is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive function. It's responsible for some parts of motivation. And it's also responsible for things like prioritizing. So studies have shown that there is less gray matter and less neural connections in the prefrontal cortex of individuals who are compulsive porn viewers. A great place that has all the scientific journals gathered is a wonderful website called Your Brain on Pornography, which is run by a researcher, the late Gary, what was his last name? I forgot his last name, but the website is called Your Brain on Porn. And for anyone who's like, oh my God, I really want to find out the studies behind this, I think with all the information that's put out on the internet, it's very important to do your research, and they really break it down, and all the latest journals are shared. Some of these journals also have the brain scans included. So one of the first things that happens is over time, a compulsive porn viewer becomes very impulsive and loses the ability to prioritize and focus on different things. Mm-hmm. They are constantly needing to medicate stress and strong emotions. When it comes to your biochemistry, it also negatively impacts it as well. A lot of people, when they use pornography or orgasm to regulate themselves, they're usually messing with their hormones. So when you're stressed out, you experience a spike in cortisol. Now, you view pornography in order to feel better about that situation. But when you masturbate, you release a hormone called prolactin. So prolactin is released in pregnant women. It's released in men when they are pair bonding with women, because it makes you a little bit more relaxed. You stay at nature designed you to stay at home and not go running around. So married men's prolactin level is a little bit higher. They keep more body fat, hence dad bod and those sort of things. But when you compulsively masturbate, you constantly put prolactin through your body. So a lot of our clients, they're like, man, when I have sex, I have this feeling that I'm just exhausted and I want to go to sleep, right? That's the prolactin release. But when they're compulsively masturbating throughout the day, they keep their body in that state. Their body their nervous system becomes conditioned to release prolactin. And there's a condition called hyperprolactemia that affects some men, and these are coming out in the studies, that basically keeps them lethargic throughout the day. Probably the biggest impact of pornography on men, one that most regular people would talk about, is what we call porn-induced erectile dysfunction. This isn't my term. This is an actual scientific term.
Yeah.
And that's when you are unable to maintain an erection because you've been conditioned to view pornography. So the only way that you can get aroused and stay aroused is by viewing digital images of sex.
I see. Have you researched or worked with women also? Or is it specifically targeted at men?
When I started my practice 11 years ago, I did start working with women, but I quickly stopped because I realized that women's behavior with pornography, frankly speaking, is a lot more complex than men's. So men will show up and present what their issue is. I'm having this problem with pornography. I'm having XYZ problem. Women would show up with something else that is a co-occurring disorder. So women would show up more with anxiety or with some other form of trauma, and the connection between their anxiety, their trauma, their depression, and their sexual acting out behavior is usually a little bit more complex. It's not as straightforward as a man. And this absolutely makes sense because in general, the way that women are aroused is very different from the way that men are aroused. Men are straight up visual. A lot of women are visual too, but there are also many other factors that are at play, including what stage of their life they're at. Men are ready to go at all times. If a woman, for example, generalizing, is at a stage of her life where she's ready to settle down with someone and she's dating that person, her sexual behavior is going to be very different from when she's, single and out there and ready to be sexually available. So all of those things play a role, but I will say that there needs to be more experts who specialize in supporting women with their compulsive sexual behaviors.
I'm just wondering whether the release of this hormone that you mentioned with men when they're masturbating, whether there was a similar hormone and how it affects women masturbating.
I'm not sure, frankly speaking, if prolactin is actually released in women.
I see.
When it comes to masturbation. I do know that biologically speaking, there are quite a few differences. For instance, women do not have the refractory period that men have. And even their behaviors with pornography, some of their behaviors overlap, but not all of them. So women are less likely to, for instance, compulsively masturbate during the day if they're at work. Men will masturbate at work. They'll go into the bathroom, they'll do it, and they'll do it on a more consistent basis compared to a woman.
Yeah. Tell us your story now. How did this all begin? What happened? What brought you on this path?
Well, when I was 8 years old, Zorina, that was when I was first exposed to pornography. So I'm part of a generation that they called latchkey kids, which meant that our parents were working. When we came back from school, you had to come in, lock the door, and don't let anybody in, right? So we used to have a older cousin, who would come to check in on us. And one day she came over with a comic book. And as a kid, I loved comic books. I was like, okay, cool. So I asked her, like, hey, when you're finished reading, can I read the comic book? And for some reason, she just wouldn't let me read a comic book. So I became determined to find it. Eventually, I found out where she was hiding it because she hid it for some reason. So I found it, and it turned out to be pornographic in nature. Now, I'm 8 years old. I was raised by Catholic parents and strict Catholic parents. So I already knew this was naughty. I knew this was a problem. But it's a comic book, and everything that was illustrated in there was exaggerated. Everything was bigger than it should be. Now, I'm 8 years old. I know it's sex. I know I will get in trouble, but I'm also scared because I'm like, is this what sex is? Oh my God, this looks crazy. So this is my first exposure to this. But the problem happened when I got excited because it was something taboo. I'm not supposed to do this. And I liked the feeling of adrenaline release. So what happened after that was for the next few years, every time as a child that I felt rejected or I was punished or I didn't get what I wanted and I wanted to feel better, I wanted to self-soothe, I self-soothed by searching for nudity because it changed my state. And I continued doing that until I hit puberty and then I learned how to masturbate. And that was when it became a compulsive behavior because I used it for everything. Acne on my face, not feeling attractive, girl rejected me at school, not good at sports, all those things. I would just go straight back to pornography. And I thought it was normal. I didn't know anything was wrong with me till I was in my early 20s.
What happened then? How did you find it out?
Well, I got to college, and that was when I was around other adults, but I was still acting like a boy. And I wanted to date, and I just noticed that socially something was off. And socially something was off because I was a guy who only played video games and masturbated. Every time in my teenage years when I had the opportunity to mix with people, and there was something uncomfortable, I would just run to pornography. I didn't realize how much I was doing it. So obviously I came into college as a weird kid and I was very sensitive to those things where it's just like girls didn't find me attractive. They thought I was weird. I didn't know I was, there's the guy who's always checking out women. Everybody knows that guy. I was that guy. I didn't know I was the creepy guy. And so women walked out and people were seeing me doing that. It was some very close friends. It was a close female friend who was just like, hey, like she was a close female friend because she had a lot of brothers, right? And she's like, you need to stop doing that. I was like, doing what? She's like, that you're just looking at women, you're just ogling them. It's gross. You need to stop that. So little things like that made me realize that on the inside, I didn't feel like that person. I could watch a movie or a skit about a creepy guy and laugh, but to start realizing that I was that guy was very strange and disturbing. I also, how would I put it? I was very awkward, and I was awkward because I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of shame because I was just like, I couldn't talk to women. I got to this point where I had so much anxiety about approaching women and talking to women and dating that my dating life looked like this. I would wait till Thursday in college, then I would go out to the bars. I would drink, I would get drunk because that was the only time I could talk to women. And then I would try to grind on them in the club and just doing creepy stuff. Nothing would work out, obviously. So I'd come home alone. I would get on the porn sites. I would watch pornography, or I'd find chat sites and I'll start chatting with women from all over the world. And that became a big problem. My addiction went from just watching pornography. It wasn't enough for me. I needed more. So I would masturbate on chat sites with women. And these women would tell me, oh my goodness, like, but you're handsome. Like, why don't you have a girlfriend? While the money is charging, right, for each minute. And I started building these virtual relationships with women in like Latvia and Colombia and paying them money. Eventually it wasn't enough. So I started looking for anonymous sexual encounters. This was before apps. So there were sites like Craigslist that had anonymous, just anonymous personals. And I would get on these personals trying to find people to have sex with. I still didn't know this was a problem because I was just getting drunk, going to the club, watching porn, chatting with the people. It became a problem the day I decided to meet somebody. I tried to meet people in the past, but I couldn't for some reason or other. Usually they were fake, catfish, that sort of thing. But this day, a woman or a girl sent her picture and she said, "Hey, like I'm babysitting, I'm visiting from this college, and come over at, it was about 2 a.m. It was really early in the morning, and I come back from the club, and she sent pictures, and I was like, okay, cool, it's going to happen. I'm gonna have sex." So I get in the car and I drive there, tipsy, drunk, and I pull up behind in this suburb. And I remember very clearly because I had a BlackBerry. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah.
And I remember texting and saying like, "Hey, like, where are you at?" Now, my car was, I didn't put it on park. She was like, "Park your car." I just left it on drive because I wasn't sure what was going on. And she's like, "No, just come out. Just park your car and come out. I'll come out from the house. We'll meet in the backyard," that kind of thing. I'm still like, nah. And while I'm sitting there negotiating, the side mirror of my car breaks. The driver's side smashes. I don't know whether it was a bat or something. Turns out it was a setup. I hear voices of guys as they like break it and try to open the doors of the
Oh,
car.
wow. Yeah.
The only thing that saved me was the car was in drive. So I freaked out and panicked and hit the accelerator. I remember driving through the yard, driving through kids' toys and stuff. I come out from the other side, on the other side of the road. And Zorina, I remember driving back home, just squeezing the steering wheel, telling myself, "JK, you weren't raised like this. You weren't raised like this. You weren't raised like this." I went home and I realized through the drive home that the thought that went through my head was this: how did you get to the point that you're meeting somebody at the back of their house in some weird neighborhood? What would happen if your parents were to read something in the paper the next day that you died? Like, the good thing was I was raised well. So I was just shocked that this was my life now. I was like, it's so shameful if my parents were to read the newspaper and go like, "Oh my God, our son was found behind someone's anything." And that was when I realized it was a problem. I was like, I've gone from watching pornography to now being this weird dude trying to meet strangers on the internet at 2 a.m. drunk behind someone's house. And that's when I began the process of seeking help to end my behavior.
Wow, fascinating story. I'm glad you survived.
Glad to, believe me.
And then, yes, continue, please.
Oh, okay. Well,
You're telling in a very engaging way.
Back then, pornography addiction, when you showed up and said, "I think I'm addicted to pornography," people just, a therapist just laughed you out of their office. Now, many years ago, I had tried to talk to people about this and get on podcasts. Nobody replied to like hundreds. People were just like, "No, I don't think my audience would be comfortable with that." The fact that right now we have people reaching out to us too to speak on this tells us how much has changed in society when it comes to. I
personally have heard of quite a few people, also people at high positions that have this problem. So I know it's an issue.
Interesting. So much has actually changed, which is good and bad too. But back then, nobody would help you, because when people said when you would say sex addiction, they go like, "Well, isn't that a good thing to be addicted to sex?" Like porn addiction, like, come on, bro, like, good for you kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult to find support for this. But also, Zorina, there was a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame. It's a very hard thing. I grew up conservative, to open up and talk about this, and to talk about something that felt like nobody had a problem with it. Because from the point of view of somebody who struggles with pornography, you're the only one struggling with it, because people joke about porn, right? And you just think everyone's just enjoying it and being healthy, and you're the weirdo who can't stop. So shame really held me back. I tried all kinds of embarrassing things. I got to the point where I was even looking up supplements that could reduce my sex drive, because I thought it was a sex drive problem. I went to church. I had the pastor pray for me. And for a couple of months, I felt that I was saved and God had forgiven me for everything. Then I went right back to the behavior. I went to therapy. I looked into 12-step groups. There weren't any that were for porn addicts, but there were for substance abuse and alcohol.
I have heard this. I've had actually a guest talking about this, about alcohol. Yeah.
About alcohol. The only issue was that I didn't agree with a lot of the principles. And one of the principles was submitting to a higher power. I had no problem to a higher power with a higher power. I just didn't like the idea of feeling and admitting that I was powerless over the addictive behavior, because my point of view was that I wasn't put on this planet to identify as an addict for the rest of my life. And a lot of these systems were once an addict, always an addict. If you take one drop of alcohol, you've relapsed. And that's the reason why we're actually called Porn Reboot. That's a P, P with a dot in the middle. My money plant is covering it. It's like, yeah, it's a P, anything like this. It's a P with the reset button, because when it comes to traditional recovery, which is what I was trying, traditional recovery told you that you had to maintain that for the rest of your life. It didn't talk about the ability of the brain to rewire itself. It didn't talk about our ability to work with our subconscious or our unconscious mind to change ourselves. None of those things were addressed. Fortunately, at that point in time, I was in door-to-door sales, and I was in door-to-door sales for many years. And that's where I was exposed to a lot of ideologies when it came to the unconscious mind, when it came to awareness. You mentioned earlier something about Silva. I haven't talked about I haven't heard someone talk about that.
Using subconscious techniques.
Yeah, so Maxwell Maltz, Jose Silva, a lot of those methodologies, as a sales professional going door to door, I was exposed to them. And I started applying some of those things to my life, as well as mindfulness techniques. But at the end of the day, what I came to realize was that recovery was about recovering that which you lost to your addictive behavior over the years. But I came to see something. A lot of those people were stuck. You would go to a 12-step meeting and you would see the same old people there, the same old problems, the same relapses. Nothing was changing. And that was because they were only changing their habits and their lifestyle. But the lifestyle was a sober lifestyle, a recovery lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you are trying to recover that which you lost, let's say you're 44 years old and you were an addict since you were 24, that's 20 years. And you're trying to recover that which you lost from 24 years old. You can't do that. How are you going to recover?
But how do you know possibly what you have lost?
See, that's the problem. That's a good question, because they look to their sponsor or the therapist, whoever the authority figure is of that system, tells you who you are supposed to be now. You are in a vulnerable state, seeking help from them, and they tell you, you need to follow this step. You need to follow these values, but they are their values. And so you get a lot of people who become very religious about that, but that may not be the best thing for you. I did not like that. That's why I came up with rebooting. Rebooting, the concept behind it is, wherever you are in life, it is perfectly fine and healthy to hit the reset button and redefine your own values based on where you are right now. You're not 24 anymore, you're 44. That's okay. Like, you have to make peace with the past. Like, it's gone. There are mistakes you made, learn from them. But right now, it's perfectly fine to reset your values and redefine them. And in the process, instead of just living a lifestyle, we do what's called defining your reboot. Defining your reboot means defining what your sexual behavior is going to be like, especially when it comes to this. Like, what's your sexual behavior actually going to look like? A lot of people in traditional recovery, they are told your sexual behavior should be only have sex with the person that you are married with, right? You can only, healthy sex is only when it's with somebody that you are in a committed relationship with. That's fine. It's a good idea, but it never addresses the complexities around that. It never addresses, well, what if she doesn't want to have sex? Right? People don't address this to the addict. So the addict comes to the sponsor or the therapist and it's like, well, my wife just doesn't feel like having sex now. What do I do? And you're like, no, you need to work that out. But now you have a person who has spent their entire life having sex whenever they want to, very impulsive, viewing pornography whenever they want to, and you just put them in a box and told them that's the solution. And if this other person doesn't want to have sex with you, well, you got to use strategies and techniques to manage it. They could have used the strategies and the techniques outside of the relationship, right? So I'll hear people say this, like if they're not in a healthy relationship, they'll keep acting out. That's just one example. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, it's not about a lifestyle. You can have a lifestyle that has all these rules about how you drink, how you stay away from substances, and what your sexual behavior should be like. But lifestyles change. People get divorced. People move to different countries. People make more money and your net worth grows. Your life is going to change when that happens. Your lifestyle will change and your behavior will change as a result. What we do at Porn Reboot is we change your self-image. You are no longer the man or the woman who needs pornography in their life to medicate. And when you can change somebody's self-image on the unconscious level, they end their behavior. Anybody can use recovery techniques, but changing the self-image is what keeps you off the behavior permanently.
So if I'm reflecting back on what you told me about how this started for you, and also on the development of the prefrontal cortex that we started with at the beginning, it turns out that it is actually this underlying cause that is not the porn itself, but something that drew the people towards the porn, right? So it was a different kind of trigger that just had to push you in the direction, in your case, of porn. In other people, it pushed them into different types of compulsive behaviors, not necessarily porn. But in your case, it was, what was it when you were a child? You were stressed out, it was shame, curiosity, maybe for some other people it's stress, but in any case, it is a pre-existing condition that puts them on this trajectory.
Yes,
And this is
I
what
will
you're
clarify
addressing.
one thing. That's you are absolutely correct on that. For different people, there are we'll say that pornography is the symptom of something
Right.
else, and
Okay,
you're
so
using
you're
it to
addressing
medicate that.
okay, so what
Yeah,
you're saying is you're addressing this issue, correcting the image that is the initial cause.
absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
that's what
Tell
we're
us,
doing.
all right, great.
Yeah.
Tell us about your process. How do you correct the image?
Well, we start off with we have a three-step process that starts with habits, then lifestyle, and then self-image. The reason why the habits part is very important and also very effective is I want to clarify one last thing.
Yeah.
There's a small subset of people who actually don't have an underlying issue. They actually got addicted to high-speed internet pornography after 2006. And I'm very specific with that because before 2006, the way you could access pornography was you could access it online. But prior to this, it was very difficult to access pornography and become addicted to it. You had to go to the magazine store, or you had to go to the store across town that sold the VHS or the DVDs. You had to bring it back home. You had to hide it. When you finish watching, you had to remove it from the VHS player. You had to hide the magazine.
Yeah.
Even when the internet came about, it was still dial-up. So it's very difficult to view pornography. Pornography was also hid behind paywalls. You had to pay to access it. They would just give you a little trailer. You never were exposed to enough to make you addicted to it because it's the novelty piece of it that keeps us coming back. If it was the same type of porn, men wouldn't be as addicted to it as many men are. In 2006, that was the advent of YouTube. And when YouTube came out with as a tube site that gave you unlimited access to all kinds of videos, the pornography industry adopted that because they realized, wait a minute, instead of charging people a paywall, and the people just that made a lot of illegal pornography downloaded from different places, instead of doing that, why don't we just give them all the pornography for free, just like YouTube, and we make money off advertisers? And that's what they did. The moment high-speed internet pornography changed its format to being free and available online, nobody has to pay for pornography anymore.
Really? I didn't know that. Okay.
No, nobody has to pay for it. You still can if you want like the exclusive content, but most of the world's pornography that's produced every minute is absolutely free.
Wow, I didn't know that.
The
Wow.
moment that happened, you had regular people who were never addicted to pornography become addicted. Because then I started coming across older gentlemen who were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, at least 11 years ago when I started doing this, who told me, Yeah, I had a Playboy, Sports Illustrated, Maxim magazines, but they were like, I was never the type of guy to sit in front of my computer for hours. It's just when I was in my 40s or so, there was high speed internet in the office, and I got like a smartphone, and that's when it took off for a lot of them. But these men have no underlying issue. It just became a habitual thing. And like I said earlier on, none of us today who have viewed pornography, well, all of us who have viewed pornography have seen more naked people having sex than every one of our ancestors. We are not designed to handle that amount of stimuli. So we keep searching for it. And the interesting thing, or rather the thing that differentiates porn addiction from other types of addiction, is that the substance that we are seeking, the endogenous opiate, which is dopamine, for example, is an endogenous opiate. It is endogenous. It is inside us. We are the dealer. We don't need to call the dealer. The substance is in us. We just need to go to the process to access the thing, the hit that it's going to give us. And that's why it's called a process or a behavioral addiction, as opposed to alcohol or heroin or meth addiction, which is a substance addiction. The substance is external to you. So with that in mind, when you're dealing with a process or behavioral addiction, you start with the person's behavior. You start with the actual habit. Because unlike alcohol, which can be removed from the home and strong boundaries can be set with it, you can set boundaries with your phone. You can put filters and everything, but pornography can be accessed on Instagram, on YouTube, on so many places. So a lot of recovery programs fail because they use the model from alcohol or substance abuse addiction. But it doesn't apply to these people because anybody, when I was addicted, I would find a way to access pornography and nobody would know. Somebody could be sitting right next to you watching pornography. You would never know what they were doing, right? So we work on their habits first. Habits are identifying what are the triggers. Did you view pornography because you had a self-care issue? Self-care is you weren't managing yourself well enough. And so you got stressed out, gave in to the stress. A lot of people who worked from home, they don't know how to manage themselves. So they don't know when to take a break, take a walk, change their state. They just sit in front of their computer for hours and they build up their stress. And next thing they know, they're like, I need to take a drink. I need to view pornography. I need to watch YouTube. I need to binge watch Instagram. Why is that happening? Because you don't know how to regulate yourself. So you need appropriate habits that have to do with your self-care. After self-care and managing their habits with their boundaries, we need to make that a part of their lifestyle. They need to start doing it on a consistent basis. They need to make sure that the people that they are spending time with are those type of people as well. And they need to find the habits that work with them, for them. Well, how do they incorporate that into their lifestyle? Instead of just working out once in a while, get a gym membership if that's something that helps you. Instead of seeing a therapist once in a while when you're really triggered and when you relapse, make therapy a part of your life. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And then finally, after they've established it as a lifestyle, as I mentioned earlier, not everybody maintains their lifestyle because lifestyles change. The final piece is to change their self-image.
I understand. So is there a way to replace the dopamine that you're normally, or that people are normally getting through porn, or do you override this need altogether? What is the approach?
Well, you're going to go, anybody who has a compulsive behavior with pornography and they're used to getting a certain amount um, of dopamine, they're not going to be getting that amount of dopamine when you remove pornography from them. So their brain does need to rewire and it needs to adjust because their normal life is a life of I always have access to dopamine. So they are going to go through withdrawal symptoms just like they would with any other compulsive behavior.
How long does it take to get?
It varies. Yeah, it varies depending on the person and the length of time that they've been dealing with this. We've seen people who have dealt with withdrawal symptoms for up to 8 months on and off. And by withdrawal symptoms, it's nothing I would classify as like shaking or anything crazy like that.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of irritability, right? Sometimes there's a little bit of low level depression as your dopamine levels drop and you feel that life is very black and white. There is erectile dysfunction for a lot of men because they just don't have the dopamine to excite them. There's a lack of enthusiasm and excitement because you don't have the dopamine that's driving you to achieve things. There's a lot of tiredness as well. And so we have methodologies to deal with that. We have something called the withdrawal eliminator method, which is just part of our system that helps support men who are going through this. So it involves things like supplementation, managing your biochemistry via exercise, learning about the hormones that are involved in connecting with other people, accountability, right, with that. But also, it's a great opportunity to be very mindful about yourself, right? The mindfulness piece comes in with just observing that you are actually in pain. You don't have that dopamine being released. You're in pain, and it's okay. Do you have to be reactive to pain all the time? No. You can just sit and you can be aware. I have a strong craving for something. It's there. We teach men how to observe the nature of the craving, observe the nature of the urge. So I don't think withdrawal symptoms are a bad thing. We train men to see them as a great opportunity. We call it working with your brain instead of against your brain. See that withdrawal period as a great opportunity to learn more about yourself and what it's like to be in negative states and learn from that.
Yeah, very interesting. All right. So what else can you share about the program? How can people work with you? I know that you're booked. You said almost till the end of next year, but
Yes. Well, for one-on-one,
yeah, for one-on-one.
we do have a wait list for one-on-ones, but we do have group coaching, and we have a few therapists that work with us. We have Dr. Rankin, Dr. Eastman, Milan. So the best way to get started would be to learn more about this behavior. That's my first recommendation. So I recommend that people check out my podcast. It's called the Porn Reboot Podcast. We've got about 500 plus episodes. You can also find us on YouTube. You can search my name, J.K. Last name is Emezi, or search for Porn Reboots. We got over 13 or 1400 videos where I'm sharing techniques and strategies for dealing with pornography addiction. And I'm also educating you on that as well. And then our website is elevatedrecovery.org. And we have free trainings and workshops that can help you with any aspect of this behavior.
Great. Thank you so much for the extensive knowledge that you shared. It was very interesting.
Zorina, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
I appreciate it also. Thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise, and good luck helping more men.
Thank you.
Need it. Thanks.